Okay. Well, thanks everybody for coming. I have to tell you that the reason I came up with this talk was because I've decided I'm going to try and pull together a brochure of local people who became known nationally for one reason or another. And I thought, well, that's a good idea. What people came from Orleans County that were known in the nation for one reason or another. And in doing that, I happened across two of women from Orleans County who were on the Titanic. And I thought, okay, well that's one that we'll do. We haven't talked about anything like that. So I started doing research on the Titanic. They say that approximately 1,500 people died from the Titanic. And the water that they went into when the Titanic sank was about 2 degrees. You can see why a lot of them died. There were only 20 lifeboats, enough for 1,000 people, but half of the 2,200 passengers who were aboard at the time of the tragedy. So they only had enough boats for half of the people that were on the ship. The Titanic wreck was not found until 1985. And that's an awful long time, to my mind, to be looking for that ship. Seems like we would have had a better idea of where it was, but apparently not. There was a Japanese survivor who, instead of being celebrated, was shamed and was labeled as a coward for not dying with honor. Excuse me? I survived.
Right? That was a man, I bet.
Yeah, it was a man. Yeah, shame on him. The wreck of the Titanic lies at a depth of about 12,500 feet in the North Atlantic Ocean, about 740 kilometers southeast of Newfoundland, Canada. It lies in 2 pieces, about 600 metrics apart. So it just literally broke in half. The last global known attempted trip to tour the Titanic wreck ended in a tragedy after 5 individuals perished in a catastrophic implosion while on a submersible tour in June of 2023. So even 3 years ago, people were interested in going and seeing the wreck of the Titanic. And what got my interest was that there were local people on the Titanic. And on that also were well-to-do businessmen. J.P. Morgan was supposed to be on, but he had selected a different ship. The wealthiest passenger was John Jacob Astor IV, heir to the Astor family fortune. Other notable passengers were Macy's Isidore Strauss and his wife Ida, industrialist Benjamin Guggenheim, accompanied by his mistress, valet, and chauffeur, and widow heiress Margaret Molly Brown, who would earn the nickname Unsinkable Molly Brown by helping to maintain calm and order while the lifeboats were being loaded and boosting the spirits of the fellow survivors. So that's where Unsinkable Molly Brown came from. The people on it, the 2 women from Orleans County, were Lillian Bentham from Holly. She was a 19-year-old, and May Elizabeth Howard, 25 years old. And there were 2 men, William Doughton of Holly, a quarryman, and William Alexander, native of England, traveling to Albion to live with his sister. Those 2 men died in the Titanic. The 2 women survived. The sinking of the Titanic claimed 1,514 lives of its passengers, including the 2 Holly men. They were quarrymen visiting family in Britain that winter, and they were on the Titanic to return to New York City and then travel to Holly. They escorted Dalton's 19-year-old goddaughter, Lillian Bentham of Holly, on the trip. She was one of 710 survivors. So she survived, but the 2 men that brought her here didn't. The Titanic survivor came to Albion, and this was, there were articles in the paper. Catherine Cooper has also written one about it. May went to Albion to live with her sister, Mrs. Hewitt, and eventually she lived with both of her sisters, Mrs. Hewitt and Mrs. Kenyon. She died on November 28, 1958 of a cerebral thrombosis and was buried on December 1st, 1958 at Boxwood Cemetery in Medina. May Elizabeth Howard was born in Norfolk, England on May 2nd, 1885, and later baptized on the 26th of August the following year. For reasons unknown, May does not appear with her family in the 1891 census when they were listed as living in Hall Lane in North Walsham. When she appears on the 1901 census, the family was residing in North Walsham, and she would be listed at this address on the following census in 1911, still living with her family and now described as an unmarried laundress. May boarded the Titanic at Southampton as a third-class passenger. She was intending to join her brother in Toronto, Ontario, before joining her married sister Jane, Mrs. Henry Hewitt, who had emigrated in 1908 and lived in Albion, where May had secured work as a nanny for the Kenyon family in that town. She had reportedly been booked on another ship, but was switched to the Titanic owing to the coal strike. She traveled with the Goldsmith family, whom she knew. She reportedly endured seasickness for a period during the voyage. May escaped the sinking, leaving with Mrs. Goldsmith and her son in collapsible sea, small boat. One of the ship's officers grabbed Mrs. Goldsmith and myself and pushed us to the edge of the ship where the lifeboat was being filled with women and children. An officer there shouted, "All men back, women come first." And that's how she left the Titanic. After her arrival in New York, aboard the Carpathia, she sent the following telegram from New York: "Arrive safe, will write, May." It had been May's intention to go to Toronto to join her brother Edward, but it's unclear whether she continued on after arriving at her sister's home in Albion, New York, where she gave an interview at the Orleans American a few weeks after the disaster. It seems that she resided with her sister, Mrs. Hewitt, for a time before going into the employment of Randall Kenyon and his wife Marion and their family in Hilton, Monroe, New York, where she would help raise their 5 children. She appeared to them on the census from 1920 to 1940. Following service with Mr. and Mrs. Randall Kenyon, she later worked for their daughter Margaret, later Dietman. May, who was never married, is remembered by the Kenyon family as a very sweet lady who was wonderful with children, but who was quiet and reserved and ever fearful of water. And whilst it was common knowledge in the family that she had survived the Titanic, it was never a topic brought up to her, as she did not like to discuss it. Her last known address was 28 Smith Street, Hilton, New York. May Howard died in the Rochester State Hospital on the 28th of November, 1958, at the age of 73, and was buried on the 1st of December, 1958, in Boxwood Cemetery in Medina, New York, in the Bowen family plot. So we have one of the Titanic survivors buried in Medina. There's also something on the internet called Encyclopedia Titanica, where it gives you the biographies of people who were on the Titanic. This one is young woman survivor of the Titanic arrives in Albion, May Howard's account. So she's written her account of what happened to her on the Titanic. She said, I started from Southampton, England to visit my sister in Albion, and owing to the coal strike was prevented from shipping on one of the smaller ocean liners that left previous to the Titanic. I left Southampton with a friend of mine, Mrs. Emily Goldsmith, her husband, and son. I had not undressed for the night when the collision came, and I'm now wearing the same clothes I wore at the time of the wreck. On my first attempt to gain the deck, I was thrown down the stairway by the crush of the people who were trying to get out of that way. Later, I reached the deck and found a great crowd of people, nearly all of whom were strangers to me. One of the officers grabbed Mrs. Goldsmith and myself and pushed us to the edge of the ship, where the lifeboat was being filled with women and children. An officer shouted, all men back, women come first. There was no attempt of any of the men to get into the boat, and when we left the Titanic, our boat would easily have carried 15 more had they cared to leave the ship, but they did not realize that the ship was in danger and refused to enter the small boats. The lifeboat in which I left the Titanic was the last, but one of those picked up by the Carpathian. Our boat was a collapsible one. The one that followed us was the one that washed off the deck as the ship sank. My friend Mrs. Goldsmith and her son left the Titanic in the boat with me and were saved. Our boat was rowed by 2 men in it, and none of the women assisted them during the 4 or 5 hours between the time we left the Titanic and the time when the Carpathian rescued us. So there were 4 or 5 hours in that boat waiting to be rescued. We saw none of the dead bodies floating around our boat that some passengers are credited with having seen. I saw the Titanic when she blew up and sank. She seemed to stand with stern pointed to the sky for a few moments, then dove beneath the ocean with scarcely any ripple to the water, which was very cold and absolutely smooth. Mr. Ismay was in the boat that followed the one in which I left the ship. In our boat, 3 women and 1 man died of exposure after leaving the Titanic and were buried from the Carpathia. Mrs. Howard reached Albion with another woman and English gentlemen who were all survivors. The man, Joseph Duminy, comes from the Isle of Guernsey and tells a story of climbing into a lifeboat from the water and later assisting an elderly gentleman to a seat in the lifeboat. This man, he claims, came to him on the Carpathia and, taking his name and address, said he would hear from him later. So the old man was going to write to the man who saved his life. I think it's interesting to hear the people telling their story in their own words, rather than guessing what was said or who said it. The other person that we had, the one from Albion, but we also had one who was from Holly. Holly residents boarded the Titanic in England to head home to the United States. Of the 3, only Lillian Bentham survived the tragedy. Her 2 male companions, William Doughton and Peter McCain, lost their lives when the ship went down in the frigid Atlantic waters on that fateful night, April 14, 1912. This postcard that shows in the article was mailed by Lillian to her friend Raymond Santoro in Holly while she was still in London and several days before boarding the Titanic. So she sent a postcard showing the famous buildings in London to her family back here. So this lady was from Holly. There's quite a bit written about her and her experiences. There's one that was in the Democrat and Chronicle, April 1931. Mrs. John Black, barely reaching last boat to leave ship, and tiny craft was nearly drawn into great vortex. This is by Sam Covey. It was in the Democrat Chronicle in 1931. No, I'm not averse to another ocean voyage, although I have not been on one since, for I realized that the sinking of the Titanic was the world's greatest marine disaster, and its like probably never will happen again. Such was the declaration of Mrs. John Black of 11K Terrace, the only Rochesterian who survived the Titanic, as she looked back over the 19 years that had elapsed since the world's greatest steamship collided with an iceberg. Mrs. Black, then Miss Lillian Bentham, 17, was returning with a party of 11 from a trip to Europe. Only 2 others of her party were rescued, Mrs. Lillian Ranulph of Elizabeth, New Jersey, and Miss Emily Rugg of Wellington, Delaware. With these she frequently corresponds. Mrs. Ranulph's husband, 2 brothers, and a cousin went down with the ship. Although the passengers were being taken off in lifeboats, I did not think the Titanic was going to sink. It was so big, so magnificent, that I did not think it possible. I had gone to my stateroom, and it was just before the last of the 12 lifeboats put off that one of the young men in my party rushed into my stateroom and told me to hurry on deck. The ship was going down. I reached the deck with him just in time to get into a boat before it was lowered from the davits. I recall that the officer on the deck shouted to the seaman in charge of the lifeboat to pull away quickly, that the Titanic was going down and the suction will pull us under. A man jumped from an upper deck and landed in our boat just as we pulled away. We had just moved a few yards from the giant ship when she was broken by the explosion of her boilers and sank in 2 sections. The suction...
Did you say sank in 2 sections?
In 2 sections.
She knew that.
The boat blew. The ship that they were on blew.
But it was a mystery, I thought, that they didn't know what happened, you know.
Well, that's where the interviews with the people who were actually there is important.
Wow.
I think that's what made this so interesting, was they had interviewed people that had been on the ship and had left the ship when the ship was in trouble. When I was doing the research, I saw cautionary things that what is in the movie and what has been verbally told that comes from the movie isn't necessarily so. That obviously they took license with what they were portraying on the screen as opposed to what actually happened. So I take these word for word remembrances as what really happened until somebody can prove it didn't. But I think if I was there and I told what I saw, that's more legitimate than somebody making a film trying to get your attention. You know? It happens in every film. They cut corners or add things that weren't there to get your attention to make it more interesting. She goes on and says, the greatest horror of the experience was the 8 hours we spent floating about until we were picked up by the Carpathia. So they were floating in a small boat for 8 hours before a ship found them. I think just surviving after their ship went down was a big deal. At first the sea was smooth as glass, but it was literally dotted with human forms swimming, clinging to wreckage, fighting to climb into lifeboats. Most of them were lost. Toward morning, the wind freshened and the boats, which had been lashed together, tossed dangerously and crashed against one another, so they were cut apart. Then the lifeboats separated and drifted in all directions. Mrs. Black said the women and children in her boat suffered extremely from the cold and exposure, and that most of them were hysterical. For my part, I began to realize that I had lost nothing compared to others who had been compelled to see their relatives and friends go down with the Titanic. There was a French woman there, too, who was very much possessed. I helped the seamen with the oars and did what I could to comfort the others. Toward morning, we came upon one of the collapsible canvas boats. in a sinking condition with about 20 men on it. They were huddled together, stiff and cold, absolutely helpless. In their midst was an apparent millionaire dressed in evening clothes and a fur coat and wearing a life preserver. He had been to a gay party in the first cabin the night before and was gloriously intoxicated. He did not seem to realize the situation and was having the time of his life. Maybe he was the lucky one. He didn't realize what was going on. Took men in a boat. I helped the seamen put those 20 men into our boat, which already had more than 30 in it. We had to pile them on the bottom of the boat like so many sacks of flour because they were unable to do anything to help themselves. The boat was very much overloaded when the task was finished. Mrs. Black said the boat drifted on with the wind, which had kicked up considerably in the sea until sunrise. That was the most beautiful sunrise I've ever seen. The sun came up like a great ball of fire, casting its rays on a large iceberg behind us, causing the berg to glisten like gold. And then, far off in the distance, we saw smoke, thin and indistinct at first, but gradually coming nearer. Then we made out what it was. It was a ship answering the SOS call. It was the Carpathia. Talk about your thrill of a lifetime. To me, and I guess to most of the others in the boat, that was the most wonderful ship in the world. Then our hearts sank with terrible fear as the ship disappeared. We were sure we were lost, but it came into view again and hope revived. Several times it did that. We didn't know at the time that the Carpathia was steaming about the ocean, picking up survivors from the different lifeboats that had so widely scattered. It finally came to our boat and we were lifted on deck. They used ropes with a seat on it for the adults. The children were pulled up in rope baskets. We were given every care on the Carpathia, and it must have been a task for that ship to get us all back to New York, for the Carpathia is a small boat and was greatly overcrowded. News dispatches of 19 years ago cited Mrs. Black as one of the heroines of the disaster. Books published concerning it tell of her sacrifice in taking off her coat and giving it to an unprotected man. I had 2 coats and I could spare one, she said modestly. One of those men was virtually dead when we pulled him into our boat. 7 of them died from exposure. Mrs. Black has been married 13 years. With her and her husband lives her mother, Mrs. Mary J. Bentham, who spent many anxious hours after the sinking of the Titanic. News dispatches having reported her daughter as both a survivor and a victim. Mrs. Black says she suffered no ill effects of her experience and was all right a few hours after she was taken off of the effects of the cold and exposure. But I would not care to go through it again. Perhaps next time I wouldn't be so fortunate, she said. So that's the part that interests me, is the actual person who remembers what happened. And there's a second one on her in this Encyclopedia Titanica. So if you get interested, look for Encyclopedia Titanica. And it has interviews with survivors from the Titanic and what they remember. And this was one that was in 1962 in the Times Tribune. 50 years after A Memory of the Titanic, Lillian Bentham, only Rochesterian who was a survivor of the tragedy. And they interviewed her one more time in 1962 on what she remembered of the Titanic. So if you're interested in the Titanic and how it happened, there is a wealth of information on the internet. And the thing that I like are these actual interviews with people who were there. Not just old reports that came in at the time. Because you know and I know that a lot of that is speculation. Just a car accident in our county, half of it is speculation. So I think this business with the Titanic it's interesting. I never delved into it that far, but now that I have, it shows how much information really is out there. And I think that's where my interest in history comes, to find the actual stories, not the TV program, but the actual story. So, I hope you enjoyed what I had to say today.
Very good.
Thank you for
You know,
coming.
they got whitewashed, I think, on both sides of the Atlantic, in the British Inquiry and on our side. And
Yeah.
they paid hardly anything for loss of life because international law is really interesting.
Right, right. Yeah, and you have to think too at that time. Now we're thinking today helicopters and extra rescue people, and no, there was none of that at that time. It was all sending a ship out to try and gather up the people that were swimming in the ocean.
But they had the Morse code, and that helped a little.
Yeah, a little. But it was truly a different time. And for that size of a ship to go down, the Titanic was a big deal. Everybody wanted to go on the Titanic. That was the place to be, which didn't end up so great, but at the time it was the place to go, was on the Titanic. Anybody else?
I thought there was someone buried in Mount Albion, but maybe that was the one girl's aunt or something.
It could be, because I know they said Boxwood,
Yes,
Medina,
right.
but I wouldn't be surprised if
Because
there
I
might
thought
have
it
been.
was like when the kids did their, remember when the kids used to
Yeah, they
do
did
their
a ghost walk at the
Yes,
cemetery.
and I thought that there was a spot where they talked about
I think
something.
there is a spot.
But it must be an aunt or
A relation anyway.
Yeah.
I'm pretty sure there's one in Holland too, I think it might be that little.
I think that was probably the
She
lady
had a
from
grave
Holland.
marker, it was an interesting story, and I guess grave students
Yes,
donated, not too many years ago,
right. The kids got together in,
the school kids.
yes,
Yeah.
and pushed to get a
They do a-
headstone for Lillian Bentham.
That's
in
what she
Holland.
said, Holland.
Yeah, because they knew where she was buried, but there was no notice that she had been on the Titanic or anything about who she was. And the kids got together and did some research, and now they've got a headstone for her in the cemetery.
You know, the experimental thing that went down a few years ago, that guy that built that, he was in it. I forgot what you said, 2-3 years ago. And
Yeah.
He had like 45 minutes and it wasn't strong enough.
Yeah.
That's probably why they didn't find it for so long,
Yeah.
because it was so deep.
Right, the depth of the water, and then you're estimating where it was and which direction it was going, because they can say they were headed north. But when you actually see, if you could go back in time and see them, maybe it was more northeast.
Yeah, but it was interesting
North.
that Ballard said,
Yeah.
like you said, 85, he says, how we found it, because the things were off. He said they discovered the debris field first and then followed the debris
Yeah, and
field.
you follow the debris field, yeah. But then you're following a debris field in the ocean. So the water's
6
gonna
miles
carry,
or 5 miles down, it's way down there.
taking a shot at it, no matter what you do, taking your best guess.
I
And
think they're
sometimes
bringing
we're
stuff
ready.
up, don't you? I think they're changing, it's a grave, what do you call it when it's a grave, you know, it's on it, it's a grave, but I think they're bringing some stuff up.
Yeah, they still are, I'm still looking at it,
In
yeah.
Orlando, they have, what was it, Mary? They have a tourist attraction dedicated to that.
Uh-huh,
To the Titanic, and you could go buy a ticket, and you got a ticket with somebody's name that was on there, but you didn't find out if they survived until the end of the tour. I think they closed, didn't they?
I think so now.
Yeah,
yeah.
that was only a few years ago.
Yeah, they had that. Well, people were still diving and trying to get things off of
I
the
don't know if they
Titanic.
died, that's too far down.
Well, I know it's too far down, but I mean, at one point,
Yeah.
they were using like small submersibles to get down there to see if there was any memorabilia that they could bring up and save. Better them than me. I agree that they were right to be thinking maybe we could find something from the Titanic and put it in a museum. I think that's wonderful. I just don't want to be the one who goes down and looks. Anybody else?
You know, there's one of those museums in London too where you buy a ticket of a museum of Titanic or for the Titanic. It's in London. And then at the end, you get to see whether or not you were a survivor or if you died.
Yeah.
I believe my wife and I both lived.
I certainly hope so.
We did it in Orlando,
I think we survived.
but when we did it in Orlando, they had a power failure. So they couldn't finish it, so we had to come back. Did we ever go back? I got my ticket before, I went.
So no, you survived that?
Doomed from the beginning. Well, thank you, everybody. I
Well, thank
appreciate it.
you.